HB 3242 is framed as a privacy bill, but what it actually does is legislate where people are allowed to exist based on their biological sex assigned at birth. According to the bill text and summaries, HB 3242 restricts access to restrooms, locker rooms, changing rooms, and showers in public school based on biological sex. Adds sleeping quarters to the list of sex segregated spaces. Requires exclusive same sex housing in higher education and mandates private changing areas in schools and colleges. That also apply these restrictions to public buildings, student housing, and domestic violence shelters. It creates a private cause of action, allowing lawsuits against schools or institutions that do not comply. This is not a privacy bill. It is a statewide bathroom, housing, and shelter ban for transgender and non binary people. The mechanisms of how HB 3242 actually works. HB 3242 rewrites existing Law 70 OS 1-125 to expand sex segregated spaces and enforce them with legal penalties. Sex is defined strictly as biological sex on the original birth certificate. This excludes transgender people, non binary people, and intersex people whose documents do not match their lived identity. Schools must enforce sex segregated restrooms and changing areas. This includes restrooms, locker rooms, changing rooms, and showers. Schools must provide exclusive same sex sleeping quarters for field trips, overnight events, athletic travel, and camps. Higher education must provide exclusive same sex housing options, and this affects dorms, student apartments, Greek housing, and overnight programs. Domestic violence shelters must segregate by biological sex, and this is one of the most dangerous provisions in the bill. Institutions can be sued for violations. Parents or individuals can file lawsuits if they believe a school or institution allowed someone of the wrong sex into a protected space. This creates a climate of fear, surveillance, and policing of bodies. Transgender students are banned from facilities that match their identity. A trans girl cannot use the girls' restroom. A trans boy cannot use the boys' locker room. A non binary student cannot use any space that aligns with their identity. This forces trans students into unsafe, stigmatizing situations. Trans students are forced into wrong sex sleeping quarters. On field trips, athletic travel, or overnight events, trans students must sleep with students of their assigned sex at birth, not their lived gender. This increases bullying, harassment, physical danger, and emotional trauma. Trans students lose access to safe housing in college. HB 3242 requires colleges to offer exclusive same sex housing based on biological sex. This means trans women are forced into men's dorms, trans men are forced into women's dorms, and non binary students have no appropriate placement. This is not privacy, this is forced exposure. Trans people are excluded from domestic violence shelters. This one is the most harmful part of this bill. Domestic violence shelters must segregate by biological sex, and this means that trans women fleeing abuse may be denied entry to women's shelters. Trans men may be forced into women's shelters, and non binary survivors may be denied entirely. This puts lives at risk. Because institutions can be sued, staff and students feel pressure to verify who belongs in a space. This leads to gender policing, harassment of gender nonconforming people, increased bullying, and increased violence. Anyone who looks wrong for a space becomes a target. Trans and queer youth already face higher risks of bullying, homelessness, suicide attempts, and family rejection. HB 3242 removes one of the few places that they can feel safe: school. LGBTQ plus college students lose safe housing. Trans and non-binary students cannot access housing that matches their identity. LGBTQ adults in public buildings face restrictions. And this applies to public buildings, meaning libraries, courthouses, state offices, and public universities. Trans adults may be forced into restrooms that do not match their identity. LGBTQ plus survivors lose access to shelters. Domestic violence shelters must segregate by biological sex. This is dangerous for trans women and non-binary survivors. LGBTQ plus staff and faculty are put at risk as well. They may be forced to use facilities that do not match their identity, exposing them to harassment and violence. HB 3242 creates a culture of surveillance. Because the bill allows lawsuits, institutions will over-enforce, and this leads to staff monitoring who enters restrooms, students reporting each other, administrators policing gender expression, and increased hostility towards anyone who looks different. This is not privacy, it is policing. HB 3242 interacts with other anti-LGBTQ plus bills. As we have went over 3138 with the pronoun and name restrictions, 3130 for gender-affirming care ban, 3132 and 3134 with the DEI bans in higher education, and 1225 the birth certificate restrictions. Together, these bills erase LGBTQ identity, restricts healthcare, restricts recognition, restricts movement, restricts safety, and restricts education. HB 3242 is the bathroom shelter housing restriction place in this pattern. It also affects people outside of the community. Even though LGBTQ plus people are the primary targets, the bill harms everyone. Cisgender students who don't look masculine enough or feminine enough will be harassed. Gender nonconforming cis girls and boys may be challenged or reported. Students with intersex conditions are forced into unsafe spaces. Schools face increased lawsuits and costs. Teachers and staff must police students' bodies. This increases the workload of stress and liability. Domestic violence shelters become less safe for everyone. When shelters must police gender, survivors face delays and danger. Colleges loses housing flexibility. Students who need special accommodations, including religious students or disabled students or students with trauma histories, may be harmed by rigid sex segregation rules. And public buildings become less accessible because anyone who doesn't look right may be questioned or harassed. HB 3242 is not about privacy, it is about control. It is about restricting movement, restricting safety, and restricting identity. It forces transgender and non-binary Oklahomans into unsafe spaces. It endangers survivors. It destabilizes schools and colleges. It encourages harassment and lawsuits, and it harms everyone, not just LGBTQ plus people, by turning public spaces into battlegrounds of suspicion and of surveillance.